Milimani. My name is Haman Kamariki.
Thanks, Haman Kamariki, for the tete-a-tete with the legal minds there, even as we canvass the latest from that three-judge bench of the High Court, where they upheld the impeachment of the ex-deputy president Rigathi Gachagua, even though they gave him 50 million shillings that's payable by Senate due to a couple of issues that arose. And that's one of the issues that many political and legal minds will be debating about. The High Court found that senators violated Rigathi Gachagua's constitutional right to a fair hearing by refusing to adjourn the impeachment trial, despite acknowledging that he was ill and unable to complete his defense. And they say it created procedural imbalance and breached constitution, and that's why he was awarded 50 million shillings. But questions are arising, especially from legal and political minds. As I mentioned earlier on, there are those who are arguing that, yes, the three-judge bench found that Rigathi Gachagua's right to a fair hearing was violated, yet the bench declined to quash the impeachment and instead awarded damages. So is that 50 million enough of a remedy since his right to a fair hearing was violated? Should that have quashed the whole process its entirety? Those are some of the issues that are arising, and I'll be able to pick the mind of Elias Mutuma, who's joining us. He's a constitutional lawyer, and he has been following up on that particular ruling, which has lasted for over 10 hours. So quite a lot to dissect. But Mutuma, thanks for your patience. Let's pick up from that hot topic. So many people are talking about that particular ruling and the right to a fair hearing that was violated when it comes to Rigathi Gachagua. But the three-judge bench declined to quash the impeachment and instead awarded him 50 million shillings as a remedy. So from where you sit, is that a sound decision or is it based on shaky ground? Is it constitutional absurdity, as we've heard from some of the lawyers?
Thank you very much, Jesse, for the opportunity. As a consumer of justice and a practitioner of constitutional law in this republic, I must go on record by stating that the judgment that has been delivered is quite disappointing for two main reasons. One is that it has created a legal absurdity, and secondly, it has brought about a deeper dilemma than it was before the judgment was delivered. I will be demonstrating that shortly, but let me begin by stating that when parties move to court, whether a constitutional court or any other court indeed, there is a legitimate expectation from the warring parties that the dispute that they bring before court shall be settled with finality. Secondly, where parties move to a court such as the Constitutional Court that was handling this matter, it is expected that the Constitutional Court, in exercise of its mandate under Article 165, that the court will rise to the occasion and interpret the law and give meaning to the provisions of the Constitution, so that this judgment could be used in other similar instances as a precedent. But after hours and hours of submissions by very brilliant legal minds in this country, after thorough scrutiny of those submissions and research, the court has not been able, one, to make a final determination of the dispute before it, neither has it been able to settle the very pertinent constitutional questions by way of giving meaning to the Constitution and the provisions thereof. Why is that the case? When you look at the judgment that has been delivered, on one hand, the judges are acknowledging that Rigathi Gachagua's rights were violated in that failure by Senate to allow an adjournment in the clear wake of an emergency otherwise amounted to a violation of his right to fair hearing. What then would that attract in terms of settlement of this dispute. It would then mean that once the court finds that indeed His Excellency Rigathi Gachagua was not granted fair hearing, then naturally the outcome of that proceedings that was not anchored on fair hearing cannot be sustained, cannot be affirmed. And therefore, when the court makes that finding but fails to offer a remedy for it, it means that it has created a legal absurdity. Because on one hand, you are acknowledging that there is a violation, but you deny to give remedy. And therefore, that brings a lot of problems moving forward. Secondly, as a public interest case.
Because that ruling, they said the violation of Gachagua's fair trial rights during the impeachment proceedings calls for a remedy that goes beyond mere acknowledgement. Declaratory relief serves to recognize infringement, while damages will provide redress and underscores the seriousness of the violation. So what's the issue here?
Thank you, Jesse. You will recall that the lawyers that drafted this petition initially had sought for an order of reinstatement of His Excellency Rigathi Gachagua back into office. Later on, owing to developments, they amended the petition to strike out that request for reinstatement and in its place sought two main remedies should the court find that there was a violation of the right to fair hearing. One of the remedies that was sought is to set aside the impeachment, quash it. Secondly, because they realized that it would not be tenable to bring him back to office for obvious reasons, especially because they wouldn't have any working relationship with his boss, they had sought for compensation. That compensation is secondary to, number one, finding that the violation happened, and number two, setting aside that injurious action of impeaching the governor, the deputy president. And therefore, once the court found that there was a violation, the second obvious step was to set aside that impeachment, to declare that outcome from Senate a nullity because it was based on a violation. The court would have stopped there without even reinstating him, because that then would have served justice because it has set aside the outcome of an injurious process. And therefore, awarding damages of 50 million, but failing to set aside the impeachment is what creates legal absurdity, because on what basis then are you compensating if the injurious action still remains in place? I hope you're getting me, Jeff.
Yeah, you've definitely broken it down for us. I think most of our viewers will get the gist of that particular contentious issue on the ruling that was just served today. Before we let you go, what precedents has this ruling set? What does this ruling mean, even as we wait for Rigathi Gachagua and the other petitioners to appeal the ruling, legally, politically, briefly as possible?
Well, I would say that it's a politically correct judgment. So politically, it has set a very good precedent that the politicians and politics can override provisions of the Constitution. But legally speaking, it is not a judgment that has set any precedent, because it has only opened further doors for debate, in that any lawyer from any of the sides can pick this judgment and use it in their favor, because it is a judgment that is internally contradictory. And that's a very dangerous judgment, because it does not set any particular precedent. It cannot be quoted or used in any other cases, because it sort of just opens the issue for further debate.
Okay, seems like we're opening up Pandora's box instead of getting further illustration on what exactly this means going forward. Elias Mutuma, thanks for your time. He's a constitutional lawyer joining us via way of phone. But just to break down what has been canvassed by the lawyers briefly before we take a commercial break, the court has upheld the impeachment of Rigathi Gachagua, but they canvassed a couple of issues that were raised by the petitioners and the respondents as well. The three-judge bench upheld its jurisdiction to hear and determine the former Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua's impeachment case. They reaffirmed that Parliament is not supreme. Equally, the three-judge bench of the High Court found that no evidence to support claims that legislators or the speakers were biased in the impeachment proceedings against Rigathi Gachagua. Equally, the three-judge bench ruled that the National Assembly conducted sufficient public participation during the impeachment of Rigathi Gachagua as Deputy President. And they also found that Kithure Kindiki's nomination and approval as Deputy President following Gachagua's impeachment did not require public participation. Equally adding that the question of whether the National Assembly was properly constituted during Gachagua's impeachment proceedings is premature for determination at that particular stage. But that contentious issue on fair hearing, which we have just listened to Elias Mutuma's thoughts on it, the High Court found that senators violated Rigathi Gachagua's constitutional right to a fair hearing by refusing to adjourn the impeachment trial despite acknowledging that he was ill and unable to complete his defense. The three-judge bench said it created procedural imbalance and breached the Constitution. And that's why he was awarded 50 million shillings as a remedy. But some say it's not substantive. They're looking for other deliberations by the courts. Equally, the High Court dismissed the argument that absence of IEBC commissioners invalidated the appointment of Professor Kithure Kindiki as the Deputy President, saying the Constitution does not require commission to clear his nomination. The list goes on. It was an over 10-hour judgment, but just to finalize that they said the National Assembly was properly constituted as per the two-thirds gender principle, and the court found that alleged non-compliance does not deprive the House of Authority to entertain and determine the ex-deputy president's impeachment motion. So much was canvassed by the three-judge bench, and we will be deliberating with a lawyer right here in studio as we try and get a gist of what exactly it means legally, politically, whether this can form precedents for other court cases in regards to impeachment of a deputy president, whether it was a sound decision, whether the ruling was substantive, or was it built on shaky ground? So much to converse, but trust us to keep you updated even as we continue monitoring the after effects of that particular ruling. We now want to take a short break right here, but do keep it KTN. A lot in terms of the stories that have made headlines on the course of the day, particularly that conversation with a legal mind just to understand what exactly this ruling means. All that